helps.
I think Meg's been waiting, and then me.
I'm sorry, Meg, I couldn't even see you.
Oh, I couldn't either.
Very intelligent.
My head's in the way.
No, I mean, I'm very kind of familiar with, I did a lot of work in peace education, not character education per se, but peace education. And I think there's one aspect of it which is that it's very normative, because as you're teaching, you have a specific kind of more social, broader purpose of wanting this learning process to contribute to a more peaceful, non-violent world. So it almost seems like the idea of habits of mind, which is kind of practices of kind of mindfulness and intelligence. Now, these are not objective. There is a normative underlying valuing going on there, I think, where you're emphasizing intelligence, reflectivity, kind of all of these things do have a normative component. From what I've heard and read, it's not explicitly out there. It's more about intelligence and kind of thinking and awareness, and the goal is more towards better education and more reflective, mindful people. But that, that in and of itself is normative. The other thing is that a part of peace education is very pedagogically grounded. We talk about pedagogies. So when you talk about listening with understanding and empathy, thinking interdependently, and those practices, thinking flexibly, I think those are all embedded in pedagogies that would be espoused in peace education. And I think as well, in terms of what you're saying, having these teachers internalize these practices and habits in mind. So I do see some links there. I'm not as familiar with character education because I do think it has kind of been more, but I think in that sense, character education and peace education are somewhat more normative. It's just that character has more to do with the individual's character, and peace has more to do with the broader social outcomes. We're not talking about a global character, we're talking about individual character. So.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking on that, I'm not real familiar with character education either, but one of the chapters, this question, I didn't see it negative at all when it was asking. One of the chapters in the leading with is about character. It's about habits of mind and character education. Mm-hmm. And one of the authors is talking about it in the context of their school and their environment. So the whole school was focusing on when students were getting referred to the office, they were being asked to reflect more deeply. They were being asked to think about what caused them to get themselves into that trouble. And some of the things might be impulsivity, not listening to others, right? Not showing empathy or understanding for others. So I guess one question is, to what extent are these habits that people develop part of people's characters? Because there are people that are more empathetic and listen to people and those kinds of things, and people that are not. Is that something that's part of a person's character? And can you develop your character, and so these habits become part of your character? I'm not a character education, expert either, but I was just tying the connections based on that I read, and I thought that's so powerful what they were doing in that school, because then you can also use those in the context of classrooms in learning content, but as an overarching theme, they're using it across the entire school to develop these more orderly, safer environments for all the kids.
I just checked, the concept of character education says it's an umbrella term loosely used to describe the teaching of children in a manner that will help them develop variously as a more moral, civic, good, manner, behaved, non-bully, healthy, critical, successful, traditional, compliant, and socially acceptable beings. Concepts that are now and in the past have fallen under this term include social and emotional learning, moral reasoning, cognitive development, life skills education, health education, violence prevention, critical thinking, ethical reasoning, and conflict resolution.
So it seems very closely linked to the habits of mind.
It seems like you've characterized the introduction chapter to a book.
Sure, I think Lynn wants to jump.
Okay, good.
What I wanted to add would be to focus just on what is a habit.
what do you call, well, that's what it says, right? Why do you call them habits? But thinking about habits, because when we did the course through one of the videos that Art and Benna were talking back and forth, first of all, I think the habit is a pattern of behavior, right? And that I think we try to teach patterns of behaviors to our kids so that when, for example, when someone gives them a gift or something, they just say thank you. They don't have to go into a big process, and there's a lot of habits that we develop that are automatic. And we move towards this automaticity so we can focus on other things. But in the video, in one of the videos in Art and Benna's discussion, he was saying, I believe, that we do not want to move these habits to total automaticity, that we need to keep them at a reflective level, at an accessible level. So I continue to think about that because I also agree, I think we can, with what Maria was saying, that we can move ourselves to generally move to persistence or move to less impulsivity as we grow as human beings, and that kind of becomes a habit. But at the same time, we want to remain, to be open to being able to access that metacognitively when we get in a situation and need it. So it's kind of both things need to happen.
But that's a habit too, right? So if you
Yeah.
develop your metacognition and metacognitive processes, then you'll be better able to monitor your use of other habits as well.
So it's automatic plus monitoring.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, go ahead,
So,
George.
so referring back to the College of Education and Habits of Mind and the moral development of character or development within our students or our community, and this reference back to Dewey, to me, a lot of our discussion relates to democracy in education and democracy in this country, so that their public schools, for example, part of this development of character education and value education rests back with some of the foundations of where science, where habits of mind and habits of thinking have derived from the 19th into the 20th century and beyond. So I think a good representation of what it is we are doing comes from that introductory chapter that we wrote about, which I look at a lot because it is more complex than, for example, the chapter that Kathy and I wrote. It is a lot there about why we do what we do and how we are trying to do what we do. And to me, there's a link to habits of mind to these, this idea of moral education for moral purposes, and then democracy in education, which is links directly to the way I feel about public schools and what sometimes is missing in our system is the democracy and the issues of teacher empowerment and other issues that are so important to have democracy in our society.
Is there a question?
Yeah.
In our discussion, what you guys raised, we came at it this way. In fact, George, remember Dewey's 1922 Human Nature and Conduct, in which he brought out that most people, when they hear the word habit, we think of bad habits, being drunk and lewd and lascivious. And we perceive habits as something within us
Sounds fine to me.
Prohibition came in, right about there.
that control us, and we have no control over it. And that's why the word gets misused. But if you start to think of it this way, think of tools. You have nails and boards, they don't do anything by themselves. But as soon as a human being, you decide, I want to build a box, now those tools become a means to that end. But to build a box doesn't come out of the ear. It has to come from your experiences in terms of why you want the box. And in that sense, then the habits become the means toward helping you to do that, because things may not work out in building it directly the same way. So you have to persist then. And it links to one's character. because my character becomes the means, because I could easily say to hell with it, I'm not gonna do it if it doesn't work the first time. That's my character. And I think a key connection would be in terms of the value part. What Dewey calls then, if I engage in that process continually, I'm engaging or in the essential moral interest of learning and growth. So character, it shouldn't be associated with religion, because it usually is in some quarters. It's our everyday living and growing and learning. So we were chatting about that from our side. And I agree with you, George, that the habits that we were talking about are forms of executive skills, of efficiency of doing, which leads up to the larger, to do with others, forms the democratic mode then.
The term that stuck out with me with the habit is it's acquired, okay? And it's not something that, you know, that we come out of the womb with, right? But it's something that we acquire. And so it's really a skill, which then turns into a way of behaving. You know, there's a developmental process, and I think that's one of the things that I read in the Anderson and Acosta and Kalick, something I read that was theirs, that talked about, you know, it being a lifelong process, which would also support that it's acquired and it's not something that's just there and you forget about it. I think our 12 minutes are up.
Yeah. So you should, what you just said sure seems to bring up that there are two concepts then, acquiring and inquiring. To inquire, I have to acquire. That's the content. And to acquire in and of itself doesn't lead to inquiry.
Right.
There's a mechanism in between there. Okay. Who's got 8? Who's got 8?
Lynn does.
All right.
I've got so much to teach already. How can I add anything more to my curriculum? My plate is full. I like that one just because in our classes, if that's not, we hear that constantly, right? So I can see that being a big, big question. And so it's one that we talk about all the time, is we have to add new standards if you have to have everything else. So I don't know if another group wants to go first, or do you want us to start with our answer?
Start with yours.
Wrong question. With what we tell our students. I love the volunteers.
That was it.
You're just being gracious, right?
Okay, I'll put it.
You're being good listeners.
I'm gonna put my.
We're controlling our impulsivity.
Do you want to? I will if you don't want to.
No, I have a very short response, is I just want to, we talked about this, I don't think you really have to add it. I think that if you do it, it's woven into what you do in every day that you're teaching. So I don't look at it as adding something, it's there. I look at all these 16 habits of mind, and at one time or another, we're doing them when we're teaching. So it's not, I wouldn't put that on my list of things that I have to do. They're just there.
I think you make up a good point, though, that we model
Yes.
for the students. We model the habits. We maybe don't actually,
Exactly. Right.
this is what
Right.
persistence is, but we model, and then we bring give them examples or have them reflect on maybe the what they did that was, let's say, interdependent when they were working in a group. And what could they do better?
Especially when they're working in groups.
Yeah.
Yes. I also think that becoming more intentional and giving a name to the behavior that you are doing, it's important, because then it becomes a habit. And then the kids start becoming aware of that. And as you said, it becomes an executive.
Like your visible thinkers.
Exactly. Well, those are tools as well. Yeah.
Support each other.
One of the things that I want them to understand is the complexity and nature of the class they exist in. So our courses often have 3 or more majors in them, major programs that represent different things and are separate and are related and similar but separate. So the students need to go to the College of Education framework and the habits of mind to get that closeness of finding, if they haven't already, a connection of what all programs, what all courses and all programs have. And for us in the community, it's learning more about each other's courses to have any chance of helping them to link these connections. Because if we're not connected, we're teaching through space or things that are not understandable that we would not have a way to help them understand, I think. So this community really lives in different ways, and that is one way to bring us all together to help them to come and be able to work in a class where everyone's at a different, going in different directions when they first arrive. So when I can say or hear from them that they've done something with Erskine or Joyce or some one of you, I can really latch onto that and help them move to another level with it.
I agree. We're supposedly experts in our field, and we have to make the connections to show them and model for them those connections. You're right.
Lynn, I think Eva wanted to jump in. And we
Yeah.
haven't heard
Thank you,
from Joyce.
No, don't worry. I just think it has really improved the quality of education that I've delivered, and that I'm getting my students to really take that information in and be a little bit more reflective and less impulsive. Really for me. So.
Well, I think that by labeling these ideas, they all have a handle on what it is you're referring to, and then they can see that it has application across so many different areas. And, you can hope that you're getting to the same thing, but if you don't label it and identify it and make it something almost tangible by labeling it, then you miss the opportunity to help them see how to recall at another point. How you have transfer across courses, but across their life experiences. So, it enhances transfer.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just, I just was curious, because when I read this, I think about classroom teachers, and I think about going in and talking to classroom teachers and then going, yeah, thanks, I'm good. I got plenty to do. I don't need any other
Keep
new
adding things
things.
because
never
that's what
take
the
anything
mentality.
away.
Because the mentality is the district is sending another thing down, and here we go, now it's this thing, and it's anti that, and it's pro this, and it's pro the other thing. So I'd like to hear.
I think at least what I was going to say links into you, because the word that popped out for me was teaching. And from dialogues I've had with people in this room, I honestly don't think, I haven't talked a lot to you yet, but I'm guessing that teaching equals learning. Teaching means student learning, not just covering curriculum. And this question 8 is easy for me to read with that exasperation of a teacher who's thinking about the curriculum to cover versus what their students are learning. And once we think about what students are, how we facilitate learning, then how can we not incorporate, like Helen said, the habits of mind is just the living, breathing part of facilitating learning, So anyway, that it's how people interpret that teaching thing can make a difference.
Right, and I think that if teachers have the mindset of you want to cover the curriculum, and this is what has another thing to add on the list. I hear it. I'm in the elementary classroom, so I know. But then again, if you're with the mindset of thinking you want to reach the child holistically, you are embracing habits of minds. So what I have tended, from the previous years, is that I go ahead and I have her present 1 or 2 habits of mind. She presents the lessons to the students. I have a huge poster on my door, and we bring it on like this. When she's presenting it to them, they become familiar with it. And then we go ahead and we intertwine, because they intertwine the behaviors. And I'll go ahead and mention, in my case, mention to her, the students need listening with, empathy, or wherever I see the group, whatever the need is. And then we go ahead and say, well, we bring in another and we intertwine. But in reference to the bringing it to another thing, it's like, no, take a little time to do it. It's not an added thing to do on the list. And it's the way it's modeling, like she had mentioned before, where they see that it's becoming more aware now that it's not something like that. It's taken a little time, but they become more familiar with, it's just their behavior. And if you're molding the child and you're thinking of teaching the child holistically, then you get to see that it's, you're helping them in the long run, acknowledge their own behaviors.
And I can contrast what she said to the last question when we talked about character education versus values and habits. You know, a lot of times districts try to give a character of the month. So in February, it's honesty, you know, a salute to President's Day or something. But March 1st rolls around and Tommy will say, I don't have my homework. Didn't you know that we had homework? No, you never told me we had. Oh, really? And another kid will say, well, it's March 1st. Honesty month is over, so now we're talking about integrity. And so, you know, it's like that is additive. That's an idea that a district puts together something now, in addition to everything else, teach, you know, your suicide prevention and your drug abuse awareness education and add this and that. And teachers do begin to think, okay, 90 minutes divided by 15 things. After 6 minutes, now I'm into the next moment. Because if a habit of mind is not on the pacing guide, where do we fit it in?
Yeah.
But now we hopefully can show that it's not about what's on the pacing guide. It might even be a response to everything that is on the pacing guide, and one way to cover it and to teach children and to learn yourself and practice the habits is your approach and your attitude and your mindset toward what is on the pacing guide mixed with good habits of thinking and behavior. How do we get where we need to go? So I do know that many teachers see things as additive, but this is one thing where I can say, I almost feel like in some ways, I don't want to say it's subtractive or it's, you know, multiplicative, but I'll say the habits can allow teachers to double up, combine, interweave, and get more thoughtful discussions in the same amount of time, instead of thinking, here's an extra layer.
Right.
I was gonna say that because that's happening because everything is presented in such boxy.
Right.
You know, yeah. And if we can empower teachers to think out of that and to see the undergoing current that connects everything and those links, I think that's where habits of mind come in handy
And I
or
also,
useful.
Patsy, we hadn't heard from you.
Well, I just real quickly to link the character education and everything, because Patsy's part of our group. You can still talk. One of the things I wanted to go back to the book, because Maria, you had mentioned that school, using it across school. We're talking about across teachers. We're talking across university. And I think one of the things to come back to the origin of habits of mind and even, like you said, scientific thinking, and to kind of come back home to say the habits of mind they transcend everything. They're not elementary, they're not university level, they're not. It's a human thing that as skillful, successful people, that they studied this and researched this and said, you know, like you said, even back to Dewey, that what's intelligent behavior? What do successful, effective people do? They have these intelligent behaviors that they develop and they become habits. And you know, to me, that's where it all goes back to, is that we're not adding something, that this is something that all humans, for problem solving, could use these intelligent behaviors. So it's not teaching an additive, as you're all saying, that it's integral to just human development almost.
So would it be safe to say
So that
then?
Patsy?
So would it be safe to say then that in terms of George alluded to moral development, that reflective intelligence has to do with learning socially. And so I learned from George and Kathy when they shared the 5 E's. So now the 5 E's are part of my course, etc. And it's added, but it's not additive. It's just, and George has been pointing out that the connection, I don't have to worry about adding. It's an extension out of things. So, but Patsy, you got to be on camera, Patsy.
Oh. What I've been doing is sort of like taking notes, because I'm making a chart for question 17, which I guess will be next time. and it talks about like the developmental stages. And I was thinking about what my students were talking about in terms of using that, like, well, this is too much, all my kids can't really grasp it. I could go through it, but it's gonna be gone unless I constantly repeat it. And so I was kind of taking these ideas and sort of like putting it in terms of from pre-K all the way up to 12th grade. And I wanted to meet with Angela and you in terms of, because on your tape you talked about grouping, how you would take some of the habits of mind. Remember the tape? It's a video you said, and you were saying how you could group it together, which, you know, to show how it kind of fits together and is webbed together. But on maybe in an early elementary level, they wouldn't be able to grasp it. So I kind of see all these questions and all the things we're talking about really coming together with those last couple of questions in terms of putting the whole package together.
Okay. Yeah. So we're time on the clock, so we'll do this then. This is going to Michelle, so she gets a flavor of with each group, either write your responses overall to the items that we'll send to her, so she sees what each group. I'm sorry, yeah, right, yeah, so we'll send off to her, and then we'll turn our attention next to the video component. In terms of.
Is it for the 3 questions that we talked about today, or?
The three questions no, the whole 18.
Uh-huh.